Hi everyone, I'm going to be showing you how to create very quickly this simple artistic scene in Blender. I wanted to focus on a scene that didn't involve geometry nodes, so this will be a simpler tutorial. If you do like the video, please consider subscribing because it helps the channel a lot. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first, start a brand new general scene. You might have a light and a camera and an object. Get rid of all of those, delete them. Start first of all with your world settings here. You probably want, if you're following exactly what I'm doing, just put the strength down to 0.7 for now. You can obviously just change this how you like. Slap on an HDRI if you would like. Volume is what gives the lighting its amazing look in the render. Volume scatter, bring this value down a bit and bring the density all the way down, otherwise you won't be able to see anything, to something like 0.12 is what I set it to in my render. And let's get our scene kind of laid out. So first of all, Shift A, put in a plane. We want to scale that up a bit using the S key. I want to scale that using the S key. Bring that up a bit. Also scale it locked to the X direction. And then what we also want to do is put on a subdivision surface modifier in simple mode, because we need a bit more geometry in order for the displacement that I'm going to be doing to work. So leave your viewport levels low if your computer can't handle this, but bring up, I would say, at least to 5 at this point and apply it. Maybe actually we do want to go a little bit further, so if we bring it back with Ctrl Z, put it onto perhaps 6, press apply. That's looking a bit more like it at the moment. Again, we just want a simple plane, and what we want to do after we've applied that modifier is to displace that modifier just a little bit. If you go in the normal mode, which is what this is currently doing, then it's just going to move it upwards. What we want to do is a new texture and bring this options menu on the right hand side here. At this point you can pipe in your own noise texture, anything you like. The way I did it was I used clouds as the way that I did my texture. I brought their size up a bit, so we're just modulating the floor slightly. Bring the depth to a suitable level. Again, this is kind of up to you. You're going to be changing things according to your own preferences, and the way it's set out is the way you want it to be set out. Shade that smooth. Also, bring it up slightly on the Z axis by pressing GZ to lock it to Z when you move it. Depending on the way the volume is working, we may need to double this up. So basically duplicate this again, stick it alongside itself, maybe mirror it on an axis, but for now this will do. What we're going to be doing now is bringing in another 2 meshes, but we'll just stick with one for now. Bring it up, G on the Z key again, and we would like to rotate that on the X, so RX minus 90, and that rotates it. We can then grab it on the Y, bring that across, line it up either with the edge or basically place it wherever you like. We then want to scale it on the Z to begin with, so we're going to be bringing that so it kind of touches the floor, I guess. Again, it's kind of up to you. And then we want to scale it again on the X to get a nice long corridor. Again, we'll make one for now, and we can duplicate it if it's not going into the background properly. We also want a subdivision surface modifier on this as well. Subdivision surface, again in simple mode, whack it up to 6 and apply. So what we're going to do is duplicate that by Shift D and right click to cancel the movement. So right now we have two planes, as you can see here. If we rename this one with F2, just call that ground. And if we rename this side left, just so things are organized, side right. Okay, so what we're going to do with side right is take a look at the Y location, and we are going to just take the minus off. So because our pivot is the center of the entire workspace, we are making sure that it's exactly lined up with the previous one. So what we're going to do for both, again, this is entirely up to you, but the way I've done it is with another displace modifier. Again, a new texture, and I found a really nice, cool looking kind of alien artifact way of doing things is with Voronoi. You can make this look how you like, you can play with the settings. The ones I did with my render is Chebyshev to get this kind of blocky effect. And instead of intensity of the Chebyshev effect, I did the position and outline. And that kind of gave it these hard blocks coming out of the surface. Again, change the scaling if you would like. I did a 1.1 on the size and the intensity was a 1.3. Doesn't look quite right compared to my actual render, but that's probably a sizing scaling issue, so we can bring the size right down. Have a play around with the settings, see what works for you. Okay, to copy one modifier stack from one object to another, which is what we want to do here, there's loads of ways to do it. Click on your child object, shift click on your parent object, press Ctrl L, copy modifiers, and suddenly we have the two items. Again, you can flip this, so our Z180, if you want it to be exactly mirrored on both sides, where it's not mirrored, it's the flip. Again, you can shade smooth if you would like a smooth effect. It actually probably looks better without it shaded smooth. So this is essentially our setup for the process going on. The next thing we need to be looking at is importing our dude that's going to sit in the middle. Again, I wanted an effect where this whole scene looked rather large around the person, but really you can scale it however you like. Everything is adjustable, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, it's up to you. Where I downloaded this character from, it's not something I modelled myself, I'm not that good a modeller. I downloaded this model from the free Adobe website Mixamo, and I posed him in the center of this image, so I will probably do a video on Mixamo at some point, but I'm going to import him again for the purpose of this video and just quickly show you how I did all of that. So here's our chap, he comes with all the materials as well, so I'm going to grab him and rotate him as well on the Z, and perhaps face him forward, which is what I did before. I didn't even model a torch on him, I just wanted him to sit in the scene rather delicately. In fact, you can move him down, it depends what camera angle you're going to be going for, but he's very basic. He does come with a couple of animations that do play if you're doing something over time, but this is just a static shot. And the next thing we need to be thinking about is probably the materials for this scene. So if we go into our shading tab, we want to be doing the materials for our ground first of all. So we're going to select that and go to new at the bottom here. And I went for something that looked a little bit like sand in my original render. So The way I did that was I kept the original Principal BSDF just because it's easier, and I did a slightly yellow value. I'm going to put the hex that I used last time, which was E7D16E, and that produced this nice yellow. It looks a lot better with the lighting when you get that done. And the core of making it look like sand is a noise texture. So you bring that one in, and you probably also want to do it as a bump, so you want to be affecting the normals of your object. So that's how you get this kind of grainy effect going on. And again, you just kind of bring the scale down or up, depending on how much you want it to look in your scene. Again, very basic, nothing too special going on here. And our materials for both of our side objects, I just made them green, but not too heavily green. And I bumped up the metallic to make them look a little bit otherworldly for both of them. And kind of left it at that, really. They were very, very basic. And that's just a material that came to mind when I was doing it, so we just apply that to both objects. Next thing, we want to be doing the lighting. So, first of all, I did a very easy point light. Let's go back to layout mode. I made a point light by doing Shift A, light, point, and grabbing that on the Z axis, bringing that up, and just positioning it a bit higher in this paladin's hand to make it look like he's holding a torch. So it's just a case of lining it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not going to be seeing the character from the front. So that's pretty much it. And for the lighting for that, I made that a slightly reddish colour, just because I wanted it to look a little bit like fire. And it's roughly 1200 watts on that, and a low radius. And the rest is kind of left as default on that one. And if we give that a look in the Cycles engine, that's kind of what it looks like, which is a very interesting effect. Now, what you could do is to leave the render at that. If you wanted something very cinematic, tell you what, let's turn on viewport denoising, otherwise this is going to drive me insane. If you wanted something very cinematic, kind of unearthly, I would actually tend to leave it at that, but you could bring in another light. In my original scene, I brought in just a area light, and I brought that up on the Z, and I made it very, very powerful. 10,000, something like that. I actually lowered it a lot. Something like 2,000 watts, just to expose the whole area. But I personally think this looks a lot better if you are looking at your scene with a bit more cinema in mind. So again, that volume in the scene means that this kind of background we don't really see. However, just to make sure that you're not getting problems with your background, just to make sure your background isn't interfering with your render, I would tend to turn on transparency at the bottom, which means the world background is not enabled. So what do we do now? We want to put in a camera. Just Shift A, put that camera into your scene. Now line your viewport up with roughly where you want your camera to be, then do Control Shift 0, and that brings your camera to where you're currently viewing. G twice to locally move the camera rather than globally. It's quite an important little tip. It allows you to make smaller movements and around its own axis rather than a global axis. I'd position it with kind of interesting features in mind. Maybe you don't want the soldier paladin to be center of attention in the shot. Maybe you want him to be off to the right or left, but essentially get that looking how you like. Go to your render settings, make sure you're using cycles. This will look quite poor in Eevee. You definitely want this in cycles if your computer's powerful enough. Just quickly on the rendering settings, I don't usually go into this in my videos, but I feel like it's important here. Make sure you're set to GPU compute, and also you probably want to make sure under edit preferences, if you are using a CPU, then obviously tick the CPU. If you can use optics, use optics. If you have to use CUDA, use CUDA. And if your GPU is supported here, tick the box next to it just to make sure you're using it. Close that box. Now under the scene, I would make sure, again, you're using cycles, you're using GPU compute. Viewport doesn't really matter, although you can dial these back if you like to get a bit more performance when you're actually making your scene. Under the render, I do like the noise threshold setting. I think the maximum samples can be brought down on here to 150 just to limit the amount of time spent rendering on this. Denoise it if you like the denoising effect. Don't denoise it if you don't like it. You can also bring down, because we don't have much transmission going on. We do have a bit of reflectiveness going on, but if you really are having problems with performance on your render, although this is just a single shot, then I would bump up some of these numbers. Remember, the total has to be matched to the highest on one of these ones. So if we put this, say, to 5, then the total has to be 5. Just to make sure things are going right. Maybe we do 5 light bounces. You can turn on fast GI approximation if you're having performance issues as well. And no point having motion blur, we've got no motion. And at that point we can go to our output settings. So here you can set the resolution. Again, this will affect your camera, so we can bump this up to 4K. Just look online if you want some typical values for resolution. If you want something square, then obviously make it square. Maybe that's what I'll do for this render. And if you are doing an animation, obviously select the frame rate. Render region could improve your performance as well, just something to bear in mind. And make sure you're outputting somewhere to a particular folder. And let's just see what this is going to come out like. Another important thing, just before I try and do that, we would like to go under film, and one important thing just before I hit render is go to color management. You want sRGB, you want filmic for the look, and high contrast or very high contrast for the scene. Makes it look a lot better for these kind of stylistic shots. Again, entirely up to you. Have a play around and set your render settings how you would like them. Then go to render at the top and render image. I will show you what this image looks like after the fact. Okay, the render is done. So what you can see is there's still quite a lot of noise in this scene. We could do a compositing rendering pass. I might do a compositing video at some point just to show you how that works after the fact. But from here, you can see that it took 1 minute 18 to render this single image on my slightly older hardware. Go to image at the end of it, press save. Make sure you save that to a particular location. Once again, thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please make sure to leave a like on the video and do subscribe and hit the bell if you'd like to see more tutorials in Blender.